I have told this story perhaps a dozen times since that evening, and every time I reach a certain point, the moment the first real phrase came out of that piano, I have to stop, not for effect. My throat does something I still can't fully explain, and I've been a grown man for more than 20 years. My name is Marcus Featherstone. I was 24 that autumn. I was serving canapes. The event was a cocktail reception at Drummond Hall, a private manor about 40 minutes outside the city, hosted by Sir Edmund and Lady Patricia Drummond, who threw these gatherings 4 or 5 times a year and considered them a form of civic duty, which is a polite way of saying they liked being the most important people in any given room. I had worked that circuit for 2 years. This estate, the Whitmore Townhouse, the Albemarle Foundation dinners. You learn to become furniture at these things, become invisible, keep the glasses full, and under no circumstances develop opinions. Rosa had been doing it for 12 years. She was older than most of us on the staff, somewhere in her mid-40s, though she had the kind of face that had simply settled into itself and stopped performing youth a long time ago. She was Filipino-British, raised in Birmingham, and had a manner so quiet and unhurried that new staff sometimes mistook it for slowness. It was not slowness. Rosa moved through a crowded room like water through a narrow place, unhurried, inevitable, spilling nothing. She was the most capable person I have ever shared a shift with, and I have spent a decade since in hospitality management, so that statement has been tested. She didn't talk much about her life outside of work. I knew she had a daughter, past tense, as of 3 years before that evening. She had told me once briefly, during a particularly slow stretch at a Whitmore dinner, and the way she said it, simply, without editorializing, in the same voice she might use to note that the Volo vents were running low, made it clear that the subject was not open for comfort or questions. I respected that. I filed it away and didn't take it back out. I mention it because you need to know it was there. A grief that sighs doesn't go invisible, it just learns to stand still. Drummond Hall's drawing room that evening held roughly 50 guests, all of them in the kind of attire that signals money that is old enough to be uncomfortable with ostentation but young enough to still wear it. There was a Steinway concert grand in the far corner of the room, an instrument of considerable size and considerable beauty, with a glossy black case that caught the chandelier light like still water. It stood on a raised platform, unused, as it always was at these events. It was decorative. Guests circled past it all evening without thinking of it, the way you circle past a painting you've stopped seeing. About an hour into the reception, there was a lull. These things happen. The right people drift into the wrong clusters. The conversational currents go flat, and for a few minutes a room of 50 wealthy, articulate adults has nothing to say to each other. Lady Patricia, a woman I had always found efficient rather than unkind, but who could make efficiency feel like a blade in the right moment, noticed it immediately. She scanned the room with the practiced speed of someone who had hosted 300 of these evenings, identified the problem, and went looking for a solution. Her gaze landed on Rosa. Rosa was standing near the piano, holding a tray of champagne flutes at her side. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was simply there, which was enough. "You," Lady Patricia said, and her voice carried the particular pitch of persons who had never, in her adult life, questioned whether she would be heard. "Can you play something for us? Just keep it simple, keep it soft. Something to fill the room." The guests nearest to them turned, then a few more. Within seconds, the request had propagated through the room, the way a chill moves through an open window, not announced, just felt. I was standing perhaps 8 feet away. I watched Rosa's face. She didn't flinch. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked at Lady Patricia for a moment with an expression I still can't categorize. Not resentment, not surprise. Something quieter than either. Then she looked at the piano. "Of course," she said. There was a small sound from someone near Lady Patricia's circle. Not laughter, exactly. More the shape of laughter, the anticipation of it. I watched Rosa set her tray down on the corner of a side table, slowly and precisely, making certain nothing would tip. She took off her service gloves and folded them once and set them on top of the tray. She walked to the piano. She adjusted the bench. She sat. For a moment, she simply looked at the keys, not staring, just looking, the way you look at something familiar before you begin. Then she placed her hands. What came out of that piano was not background music. It was not soft. It was not simple. The opening of the Ravel pavane is this. The melody enters alone so quiet it almost isn't there, like something heard through a closed door. It is fragile in the way that only perfectly controlled things can be fragile, because you understand immediately that any error would shatter it. Rosa played those opening bars at a pace so measured, so deliberate, that the room didn't know what it was receiving. A few guests kept talking. Then they stopped. They stopped the way people stop when a sound reaches the part of the brain that handles something other than conversation. The pavane pour une enfant défunte, the pavane for a dead princess. Ravel wrote it as a student. There are pieces of music that mean the thing they mean before you have words for it. Rosa played it with a touch so intimate, so precisely weighted, the melody breathing above the left hand's gentle pulse, that the chandelier light seemed to hush itself. I am aware of how that sounds. I mean it. I looked at the room. A woman in a red gown had turned from her conversation and was facing the piano as though she had been rotated by something outside herself. A man in his 70s, white-haired, a retired judge of some kind who had been laughing loudly 5 minutes before, had gone entirely still, with his glass held at his chest and his eyes pointed at something that wasn't in the room. 2 young women near the fireplace. I'd heard them talking about a gallery opening all evening, had moved without appearing to notice, drifted toward the piano like a tide that doesn't announce itself. Lady Patricia stood where she was. The expression on her face had changed, though I could not have said, then or now, precisely how. The glass in her hand had lowered. That is the best way I can describe it. She had simply forgotten it was there. The middle section of the pavane comes in like a different kind of weather. The melody opens up. There is something that might be longing, or might be memory of longing, which is not quite the same thing. Rosa played into it without hesitation, without sentimentality, which is the only correct way to play Ravel. He despised sentimentality in his own music, but she played with something else. Honesty, maybe. The kind you arrive at when you have already given up performing grief and simply saw it. I knew, standing 8 feet away with an empty tray at my side, that this was not the first time she had played this piece. I knew it the way you know certain things without being told. By the way the hands moved without consulting thought, by the way the body didn't tense into the difficult passages but relaxed into them. As though difficulty had long since become company, she had played this somewhere else for someone else. I thought of what she had told me at the Whitmore dinner. Her daughter's name, said once, quietly. The final section of the pavane returns to the opening theme, which is a kind of mercy. You've been through the middle of the piece, and it brings you back to the beginning, only now the beginning means something different. It is the same melody. It is not the same melody at all. Rosa played the closing bars with the same measured restraint she had opened with. No flourish, no crescendo, no statement. She simply let it arrive at its ending. The last note faded. That's the right word for what a note does when a pianist truly controls the release. It fades. It doesn't stop. It becomes smaller and smaller until you are not sure exactly when it was gone. And you sit with that uncertainty for a moment before you understand that the silence has returned. No one spoke. This was not the polite quiet of an audience waiting for applause to begin. This was the other kind, the kind where nobody moves because movement would puncture something. And something in the room has decided, collectively, that the thing is worth keeping intact for one more second, one more second, one more. The elderly man, the retired judge, made a sound. It was brief and involuntary, and he put his hand over his mouth immediately, the way people do when they are surprised by themselves. A woman near me had tears moving quietly down her face, which she appeared unaware of. The 2 young women from the fireplace were standing very close to the piano. One of them had her hand pressed to her sternum, which is something people do without knowing they're doing it. Rosa sat with her hands in her lap. Then Lady Patricia Drummond began to applaud, not the polite 2-beat applause of a hostess acknowledging a hired entertainer. She began to clap with both hands, slowly at first, and there was something in her face. And I am not prone to grand interpretations of people I barely know, but I watched this closely enough to tell you what I saw. Something that was not performance. She looked as though she had been handed something unexpectedly and hadn't decided yet what to do with it. She looked as though she'd been wrong about something, as though she had asked for a cup of tap water and been given something she no longer had a category for. The room joined her, then it rose. Not everyone at once, it rippled outward from near the piano, the way the stillness had spread in the other direction, until most of the room was standing, applauding, some of them with their voices included now. a murmur of something that kept trying to become words, and not quite managing. Rosa stood from the bench and turned to face the room. Her expression had not changed. She looked at them with that same settled, unhurried quality, the one I had always taken for a professional composure. And I understood then, watching her hold the room's gratitude without being knocked sideways by it, that it was not composure at all. It was just who she was. She nodded once, the smallest gesture, acknowledging something without claiming it, and then walked back toward where she had set her tray. She picked up her service gloves. She put them back on. She lifted the champagne tray. Lady Patricia was still applauding as Rosa moved past her. Their eyes met. I was watching for this, and Lady Patricia said something quietly, not for the room. I was close enough to see her lips. She said, "I'm sorry, that was extraordinary." Rosa said something back. I didn't see what. Then she moved on, because there were still glasses that needed filling. And there was still a roomful of guests who needed looking after, and that was what she had been hired to do. I followed a minute later, because I also had a job. I stayed in this business a long time, as I said, and I have been present at some remarkable things in my years of it. A violinist at a corporate dinner in Edinburgh, who played an encore that took the room apart. A baritone at a fundraiser in Manchester, who held a note so long that a woman in the front row reached for her neighbor's hand without knowing whose hand it was. These are the moments you collect, quietly, without mentioning them at annual reviews. But Drummond Hall is the one I returned to, not because the performance was flawless, though it was, not because of the room's reaction, though that was something I will carry until I run out of days to carry it, but because of what Rosa did afterward, and what it said about who she was. She put her gloves back on. She lifted the tray. She went back to work. She played the piece that had carried her daughter's funeral in a room full of strangers who thought they were watching someone try to do a small thing, and she did it with such wholeness and such steadiness that the room didn't know what to do with what it felt. And then she went and topped up their champagne. I have been asked sometimes whether Rosa ever played again at an event like that. The honest answer is that I don't know. We shared perhaps 6 more shifts after Drummond Hall before I moved into management, and she and I lost touch, in the gradual way you lose touch with people when your paths diverge by a matter of corridors. What I know is this: she left that hall that night, with the Steinway behind her and the room still standing, and she didn't look back. Not because she was indifferent to it, because she had already given the room everything it was going to receive, and that accounting was closed, and there was nothing more she needed to take from the moment that the moment hadn't already given. That's what mastery looks like, I think. Not the performance, what happens after it. I have been in this business long enough to have handed a great many things to a great many people, and most of what we hand each other is small, and that is fine. But every once in a long while, someone turns the ordinary direction of the giving around, and in a room that asked for a small, soft, simple thing, returns something so large and so true that 50 people who had nothing left to say to each other are suddenly, briefly, sharing the same interior. I was 24 that autumn. I have never forgotten what she played. I don't think you would have, either.